Hello guys, welcome back to the channel once again. Please, if you are new here, kindly consider subscribing to this channel. But if you are old here, thanks so much for coming back. So today we'll be designing something very simple but beautiful in Photoshop, and this is coming up. So here in Photoshop, to create a new document, you go to File, New to create a new document, and over here I'm not going to do any changes to this particular document. I'm going to set my weight to 4 and then my height also in 4. Leave my resolution to 300 pixels per inches, and then also over here I'm going to leave everything in inches, and then I'll hit on OK. So something like this will appear on your screen, and then I have to move to my notepad to add a couple of text to this particular work. So I'll copy, Ctrl C, and then make sure to hit on T, which is the shortcut key for the text tool in Photoshop, and then I'll left click at any point of the document, and then Ctrl V, make sure the whole thing is pasted, and then Ctrl T, to add a transformation to the text. Okay, so just take your time when doing all this stuff, and then also just bear in mind that this is the name of the church, so it's not all that important that the name must be too big. No, it's not done like that, but the main text can be a little bigger than the name of the church. Alright, so Ctrl A, select the whole document, and then make sure the name of the church is centered, and then Ctrl D to deselect the whole thing. Ctrl J, and then the whole thing has been copied, and then make sure to move it underneath the main text. Alright, so I'll move to my notepad again, and then we'll only be copying and be pasting text for this particular work. Alright, so Ctrl T, or hit on T to activate the text tool, and then make sure to left click on the copied layer. Ctrl A, select the whole text, and then Ctrl V to paste the present. Alright, so hit on V to activate your move tool, and then Ctrl T to add a transformation to the present text. Hit on enter to accept the whole thing in Photoshop. Alright, so Ctrl A, and then make sure the whole thing is selected, and then your text is centered. Ctrl D to deselect. Alright, so I'll still move to my notepad. As I said earlier, we'll only be copying and be pasting. Ctrl C, copy the whole thing, hit on T again to activate my text tool, and then just hit on any part of the document or any part of the work, and then make sure you paste it as well by hitting on Ctrl V. Okay, so I will make sure to center the whole thing like this, but in this case I'm going to use a font called Akira. I'm not going to use the montsarrat anymore, so I'll be using the Akira expanded, something beautiful like this, and then Ctrl T to make sure to align the whole thing to fit the rulers I have set. Hit on enter to accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and also I'll make sure to close the whole thing up a little bit. I think it's too open, so I'll close it up something like this, and then Ctrl T again to resize it to the size or to meet the requirements of the ruler I have set. Alright, so just take your time when doing all these stuffs. Yeah, so something like this will be fine for now. Use my arrow keys to shift the whole thing to the center like that. Alright, so hit on Ctrl J on your keyboard to make a duplicate, and then hold on Shift, and then use the arrow keys to shift the whole thing downward like this. And also I will go for my notepad again, and then go for my grace text. Ctrl C, copy the whole thing, and then Ctrl V and then I'll make a paste from there. Alright, so Control T to resize it to fit the rulers I have set, and then also I'll come back to this place and then do the same thing as well. Use my arrow keys to move the whole thing to get closer to the first text like this. Alright, so something like this will be fine for now. Okay, so I will hold on Shift and then left click on the first layer, and then the two layers will be selected, and then hit on what? G to group the whole thing. Left click on the group layer, go to my blending options, and then we are going to add a gradient overlay to both of the texts. Okay, so I'll come here and then select my gradient overlay, and then these are the color codes I have used in case you want to use the same color codes for your work space. Alright, so these are the color code I have used. Hit on OK and then OK here as well. And also over here I've made a couple of changes to this. I have set this to reverse, and then my angle to -154, and then my scale to 56. Hit on enter to accept the whole thing also in Photoshop. Alright, so I'll still go back to my text tool, and then I'll go for off. Alright, so Control A, select the whole thing. In this case I'm going to use a font also called this. Alright, I'll leave a link in the description for you guys, in case you want to download the whole thing. But the name of this font there I can't even mention. Alright, so I'll change the color from this. Okay guys, let's maintain this color for the meantime. Alright, and then make sure I'll close the whole thing up like this. Alright, so just take your time to close it up, and then also hit on this big T. Alright, so hit on V, accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then Control T to add a transformation to it. Alright, so hit on enter, accept the whole thing, and then I'll place it somewhere here. Right click on the layer, move to my blending options, and then I'll give it a stroke color. Alright, so I'll go for my stroke color, and then I'm going to leave the color to white, something like this, and also make sure to resize it to fit what I have shown you guys on the thumbnail. Hit on enter to accept the whole thing in Photoshop. Alright, so the next thing to do is to go for my rectangular tool and then draw a very nice rectangle under the text, the main text like this, and then make sure to give it any color for the meantime, since I'll be adding a gradient color to it. Alright, so I'll just give it this color for the meantime, and then I'll go for my movement layer, and then or maybe the group layer, right click on it to copy the layer style, and then go back to my rectangle layer and then paste the layer style there, and then close this pop-up menu. Use my move tool, move the whole thing on top like this. Alright, so I'll still go back to my notepad and then go for the 2024 edition. Okay, so Control C, copy the whole thing, and then hit on T again, left click at any point or any part of the document, and then Control V to paste the whole thing there. Alright, so Control A, select everything, and then change the color from this to a white color. Hit on V to activate my text tool, and then Control T to add a transformation to the whole thing. Alright, hit on enter. The whole thing has been accepted in Photoshop, and this is becoming more and more beautiful. Alright, go for the date of the program, which means I have to go for my notepad and then copy the date of the program. So Control C, copy the date, and then hit on what? T, left click, and then hit on T, and then left click at any point of the document, and then Control V, paste it like that. Control A, the color is in white, so we have to change it to the black color, something like this. Okay, change the font from Akira to a font called let's go for Montsarrat. Okay, hit the move to accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then Control T to add or to reduce the size of the text. Accept the whole thing in Photoshop by pressing on Enter. Use my arrow keys to make sure the whole thing has been centered, something beautiful like this. Alright, I'll go to my resources and then add the image or the main pasta hosting the program. So I'll drag and drop this image in Photoshop like this. Okay, and then make sure to transform it to look more beautiful. Accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then I'll place him somewhere here. Alright, so I'll still be adding a couple of rectangles to it. So I'll move to my rectangular tool and then draw a very nice and beautiful rectangle at the back of the image. So I'll move this rectangle layer under the image, something like this. Alright, so left click on it or right click on it to paste the layer style we have copied, and then something like this will appear on your document. Use my arrow keys to drag the whole thing on top a little bit. Alright guys, so I'll still be going back to my notepad to add a couple of text to it, and then this is also the name of the pasta hosting the program. So Control C, copy the whole thing, and so I'll click on the the date layer like this, and then Control J on your keyboard to make a duplicate, and then I'll drag the whole thing here, and then hit on T again, or to activate your text tool, Control A, select everything, and then Control V, make a paste from there. Alright, so I'll copy only the weight because I'll be using a different font for it. Alright, so accept the whole thing in Photoshop by hitting on V. Alright, so Control T on your keyboard, and then add a couple of transformations to it. I think this is too big. Alright, it's just the name of the pasta, so there's no need for it to take. Alright, so I'll drag the whole thing here, hit on T, and then copy only the weight. Control C, copy the whole thing, and then hit on delete to delete the whole thing like that. Alright, so I'll drag the whole text here like this. Okay, so still hit on T, left click, and then Control V, Control A, select everything, and then go for a font called taken by Vultures. Okay, and then make sure the whole font is not in caps, something like this. It should be in lower case, and then make sure to open the whole thing up a little bit like this. Okay, so accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then drag it on top of the name of the pasta. Use my arrow keys to reset it. Okay, so I'll double click on the layer to change the color from the black to a color of this kind. Alright, so accept the whole thing in Photoshop like this. Alright, so let's still go back to our notepad and then still be adding our text. Alright, so then as these are the social media handles, Control C, copy the whole thing, and then still be going for my the name of the pasta, and then Control J, make a duplicate, drag the whole thing on top of the rectangle I have drawn, and then since the layer is under the rectangle, it will never be shown, so I'll drag the layer on top of the rectangle I have drawn something like this, and then we'll hit on T again, left click, and then Control A, to select everything, and then Control V to paste the names of the social media handles. Alright, so Control A, accept the whole thing in Photoshop, or select everything and then change the color from the dark to what, a whitish color. Accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then Control T to add a transformation to it. Alright, so something like this will be very nice and beautiful. Okay, so use my arrow keys to drag the whole thing somewhere here. Alright, so we'll still be going back to our notepad to go for please join us and be blessed. Control C, copy the whole thing, and then we'll still be duplicating this one, and then Control J, duplicate it, and then drag the whole thing to the left hand side. Alright, so left click to copy, left click to activate your text tool, or can still go for T, and then Control A, select everything, and then Control V, and then we'll make a paste from there. Use our arrow keys to drag the whole thing to fit the document, and then make sure to open the text a little bit, something like this, and then we'll also be going for the join as text, and then make sure we open that one too, something very small like this. No, this is too opened. This is okay. Alright, the last thing to do is to go for my rounded rectangle, and then draw a very nice rounded rectangle here like this. Alright, so change the color from the white color they have given us to a dark color. Yes, so the dark color we have used here. And also make sure to change the edges to something like this. Accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then use my arrow keys to drag the whole thing to fit my document. Control T to add a little bit of transformation to it, and then Control T to accept the whole thing in Photoshop. Control J, make a duplicate, drag the whole thing underneath like this, and then Control T, add a transformation to it, and then right click to flip horizontal. Yes, and then also right click again to flip 180 degrees like this. Accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then use my arrow keys to drag the whole thing to fit, or to use my arrow keys to drag the whole thing closer to the first one drawn. Alright, and then that is where I'll be adding the time of the programs. Alright, so I'll still move to my text tool to add the time of the program. So I'll copy this only, so Control C, copy the whole thing, and then hit on T again to activate my text tool, and then left click, and then Control V to paste the whole thing like this. Control A, select the whole text, and then make sure to change the foreground color to white. Hit on enter to accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then Control T to add a transformation to it. Alright, so make sure to take your time when doing it. Okay, so drag the whole thing on the first rounded rectangle I have drawn. Alright, so just make sure to use your arrow keys to position the whole thing very well. Alright, let's still move back to our notepad, and then copy also the 10 PM GMT. So Control C, copy the whole thing, and then hit on T again on your keyboard, and then hit on any part, and then Control V, select everything, and then make sure to accept the whole thing in Photoshop like this. Control T to also add a transformation to it since it's too bigger than the rounded rectangle I have drawn. Alright, so 10 p.m. GMT. Alright, so let's go back to my resources and then add a couple of background images today. So I'll drag and drop this beautiful background I have grabbed from Google, and also I'll make sure to leave a link in the description for you guys to know access to it. Alright, so hit on enter and then move the layer to the down part of all the layers. So I'll just leave it here like this, and then Control T to make sure you reduce the size to the precise size I want the whole thing. Alright, so hit on enter, drag the whole thing at the corner here like this. Okay, so I'll just make sure to leave the whole thing here. Right click on the layer to rasterize the whole thing, and then I will now add my layer mask to it. Hit on B to also activate my brush tool, and then make sure to resize the whole thing to this. Okay, then reduce the hardness to 0. Alright, then I'll begin to brush off all these places. Alright, I don't want the background to have any effect on my text, so I'll wipe off all these places like this. Okay, so Control J to make a duplicate, and then make sure to hit or go for my hue and saturation, and then set the whole thing to -11. So I only set this to -11, something like this, and then I'll hit on OK. Alright, so that is it for now. And then I'll move to my blending options and then set this to hue, something like this. Okay, so I'll now move back to the first background and then make sure to wipe it here correct, and then also move back to the second one and then make sure the whole thing has been wiped off accurately. Yeah, so something like this is becoming more and more beautiful. Control J on the layer, copy it and then move it here. Control T and then hit on enter, or Control T and then right click on it and then flip horizontal, something like this. Alright, so I only need the effect, only some small part of the effect in this area. Alright, so I'll still go for my brush tool by hitting on B and then wipe off or brush off all these places that are not needed, since I don't want it to disturb my text. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to add is to go back to my resources folder and then add this beautiful eagle also. So I'll drag and drop this eagle in Photoshop and then make sure to leave it somewhere here. Alright, so Control T to add a couple of transformation to it. Hit on enter, accept the whole thing like this, and then make sure to send the layer on top of all the layers, something like this. Alright, so moment of grace. So we have some a dove where it represents grace, yes, grace spirit. Alright, so I'll leave the whole thing here like this. Okay, so we should calm down a little bit. Just take your time when doing all these stuffs. Control T to still add a little bit of transformation to it, and then hit on enter, accept the whole thing in Photoshop, and then I'll leave it here. Alright, so Control J to still make a duplicate, send the whole thing on top here like this, and then Control T, right click and then flip horizontal, hit on enter to accept the whole thing in Photoshop like this. Okay, so right click on that layer to rasterize the whole thing, and now move to filter, blur, and then go for what, the gauging blur, or how you guys call it, I don't even know. Alright, so I'll be playing with these ones and then see the one that will blur the whole thing very nice for me like this, and then I'll hit on OK. Alright, so this is what I have for you guys for today, and I want to thank you all for sticking around to watch this beautiful tutorial. I'll catch you all in the next video, and then make sure to subscribe so this channel can be grown. Thank you guys, and I am out.